Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world today. My name is Maryam, and I am the host of Television. And as I always say, when I start the program, I always say, I bring on the best guests. And today is another best guest. And he and I go way back. I think it's like 2013, 2013, something like that, right?
Long time, yeah.
And he has written a book, and wait until you hear what the book is all about. I love the title.
Right.
The title is They Do Business, We Do Time.
No, we do time.
We do time.
They do business, right?
They do business,
yes.
And we do time. Mm-hmm. That's right. And so I'm talking to street counselor, but the name on the book is
That's right.
Tyrone Barnes.
Tyrone Barnes.
Tyrone Barnes, and we're going to show you how to get a copy of his book.
That's right.
So let me tell you, Street, this is what I picked up, because when I heard about the book, and I said, I got to do something different, with you coming on. Because the reason why I have the 3 books here, as I said earlier, is your book is about prison.
Yes.
My book, Broken Spirit, Let It Go So You Can Grow, is about my years working in the prison system.
Right.
And The 50th Law by 50 Cent is his years doing the things that he was doing.
Right.
And look at us today.
Cool.
God is good.
That's right.
So this is what I thought about a show that 50 did. Right. I said 50 Cent's For Life series was inspired by the life of Isaac Wright Jr.,
right,
who was wrongfully convicted.
That's right.
Is a family drama about an imprisoned man, Aaron Wallace, who became a lawyer, litigating cases for other inmates while fighting to overturn his own life sentence for a crime he didn't commit. I immediately thought about you, because when we met and you started telling me everything that you was doing and what you was doing,
right,
you helped so many brothers inside of Delaney Hall.
That's correct.
And not just Delaney Hall, but throughout the city of Newark.
Right.
You've been doing legal things to help us.
Right.
So I want you to introduce yourself, and then we'll get started about the discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Ms. Bay. It's been a long time. I mean, I appreciate you always, putting the ones who've been on the front line, always thinking about us and stepping up to the plate and really, doing what you got to do for the people. I was talking about it earlier when you study the history of the movement with Malcolm and King, and it ain't the kids that carry the torch, it's people like us that's really pushing forward. My name is Street Counsel, born and raised in Prince Street Projects. Moved to Velsburg from there, and my grandmother's house was in the foster homes and stuff. And I decided I had it all figured out. I was grown,
Right.
Turned 18. I said, yeah, I ain't listening to these strict rules no more, and ended up in a box where the rules was even more stricter. Where it was inhumane, and we talking about food that you can't even identify, and abuse was at an all-time level. Due Process did a piece on me about solitary confinement. I was born and raised to a mother at 14 years. She was 14 years old when she had me. She was running the streets. Her mother kicked out the house at 14. Her mother is still around. My mother passed away. She OD'd, but her mother is still around, 90-something years old. I really don't have no connection, because that trauma is still affecting me of how she was treated and throughout the house. So that's began with my journey, with my passion with the youth and with the kids, and really, to step up. So I decided to leave my grandmother's house, had it all figured out, and left the house.
Right.
Ended up in a prison cell for 20 years. Yeah. Did 20 years, armed robberies. I was just cutting up, hanging around people that my grandmother always told me to stay away from. Of fought my first case, and ain't see the streets in 20 years. So while I was in there, Malcolm studied the dictionary, I studied law. Law was my passion. My grandmother passed away, and the money order stopped, the food packages stopped. So I had to find a way to, to eat and survive, and I learned the law.
Right.
Law was my passion. I learned mostly the law in solitary confinement. I was locked down 24 hours a day. I wasn't a favorite inside the prison systems among the staff and administrators because, you study history, nobody like a smart Negro, no, smart man. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So they took issue, and I stayed in solitary. I was set up by numerous officers, inside the prisons to get me out the way, to get me, stashed away, and hid in solitary confinement, and they want me educating people and waking them up. I was always in the librarian population, so they contained me. They put me in solitary confinement, put me in a box. And, I just began to start reading cases, more cases, and came out after 20 years. Got 6 parole hits, by the way. I took parole. Every time I took them to federal court, I appealed it all the way to federal court. By the time I appeal the first one, I'm up for parole again. They give me a second one. I got to appeal the second one. The first one ain't even decided yet. So, I got 6 parole hits as a young offender, never been locked up in my life. It was a rough ride. It was a rough hit, but I stayed the course, and I was determined to come out and continue to push forward. And I learned the law, and I was able to, I remember they had a brother named Alfred, in Rahway, East Jersey State Prison, where, they designed a specialized cell on top of a cell. So we already locked in solitary confinement, but what they did is they created another box outside that cell where, they just treated this guy, like inhumane. I showed him how to litigate, wrote the civil rights complaint against him, and I was ecstatic to really hear that the brother finally got out of solitary confinement, got out of them conditions.
Right.
We talk about El Salvador and what Trump doing. This happened before Trump got in office.
Exactly.
Democrats and all of it, they was ready in office.
Yes.
We were the same people, black legislators and lawmakers that's in the city.
Yep.
And they did this right, under their watch. And
That's right.
it was harsh. It was vicious, and I wrote the complaint, and they began to sending subpoenas out to officers and administrators, and they got the brother out. The brother, was out. He's out, and he's in the general population as opposed to the condition of him. So my fight, it's been a long fight. You mentioned Delaney Hall.
Yes.
Hall, before it became popular with the immigrants, before it became popular, we was in there, Desert Storm,
Yes,
fighting
that's
for the
right.
brothers, them same conditions that the immigrants explored, that's the same conditions our people explore.
That's right.
And continue to explore in the Essex County Jail.
Exactly. Exactly.
But
at least they had people like us in there.
Yeah, that's right.
Who didn't take no stuff.
We didn't. I mean, we fought for the brother. My
Yes.
role in there, your role was to continue to get them counseling and really educate them and let them know what their true worth was.
Yep.
And my role was to go in and let them know that that their condition have to be realized beyond the confines of their environment.
Right.
So I was teaching them law, writing, showing them how to write motions.
Yes.
A lot of guys are complaining about we ain't got no paper and the right. I said, listen, you can write on the toilet paper. Supreme Court case came out where outline you could write cases on the toilet tissue. So there's no excuses. Men make excuses. Boys make excuses, men to make it happen.
Right. Yes.
A lot of that's inspired my book. We do time, they do business. Throughout my journey, 18-year-old fella, 6 months after graduating high school, entering into that domain, in the prison setting, and got to really see, officers and their children come in and how their children retired off of black bodies, or how the officers and administrators retired off of black bodies, and I saw, numerous times how black bodies serve as an economic stimulus,
Yes.
for other people but us, So it was a time, the time is now where, had to educate our people and realize and then break it down of how black bodies serve as an economic stimulus and continue within the prison. You talking about, the slave trade.
That's
The
what I was
prison
gonna say.
population have
Slave
more
trade, yes.
people, within probation and under this criminal injustice system, more than slaves put together. So,
Yes.
you know, we got a lot of fight to do, and we continue to push.
And you know what you remind me of? When I was working at Delaney Hall,
Yes.
I had a brother to come in, and I looked at his paperwork, his discovery.
Right.
I looked at it and everything, and I told him, I said, you know what? You're being charged for the wrong drug.
Right.
I said, this is not the drug that you should be charged for.
Right.
I had no idea that once he was released, that he was going to sue somebody. And
Excellent.
it was my first time and it was when I was leaving Delaney Hall to come and work for the city.
Right.
And before I left, I get a subpoena to come to court.
Right.
And I'm saying
Right.
to myself, why am I getting a subpoena for who? So they gave me, so I said, let me get this brother's file and everything, because I don't know what was going on, right?
Right.
So I get there, and the judge and the prosecutor, and in there was like these police officers. And so the judge says to me, so Ms. Bay, he read everything, he said, how do you know it was the wrong drug? I said, because I read the discovery, and when I read the discovery, I saw that it was the wrong drug that he was being charged with, and I just happened to tell him. Well, when he was released, did you talk to him about anything? I said, no. I didn't. I haven't seen him since he's been released.
Right.
You know, I said, but I always tell the brothers, if you live in Newark, we're gonna see each other. You know,
That's
because
right.
I live in Newark.
That's a fact.
Okay, so
That's right.
So I said, but I've never saw him.
Right.
So then he said, but how did you know it was the wrong drug? I said, because I looked it up.
Right.
I said, I'm an educated woman. I looked it up.
Right.
Right? And his mouth went. And so then the judge said to the officers, well, do you all have anything for Miss Bay? They said no.
Yeah.
So guess what happened?
Right.
2 years ago, I'm down at One Stop, walking in the lobby area, right? And this brother says, Miss Bay, Miss Bay. I turned around, I said, hey brother, I said, how you doing? He said, I'm fine. He said, don't you remember me? I said, not really. I said, but,
So many people you helped.
right, I said, not really. I said,
Right.
right. So he said, you're the one who wrote the letter for me. I said, well, which letter? Because I write a lot of letters.
Right.
Well, what letter? He said, the letter about the drug. You said it was, I said, you're the one I was subpoenaed for.
Right.
He
That's
said,
a blessing.
Yes, I said,
Yeah.
he said he had sued them. I had no idea, and he won.
Yeah, as he should.
So I said, okay, now are you staying out of trouble now? He said, yes, Miss Bay, that's why I'm down here.
Right.
I said, perfect.
Yeah, excellent.
You know, and so then after that, but prior to that, I was always asking the brothers and sisters, you know, when they came into Delaney Hall, I want to see your discoveries, because getting back to what you said earlier,
Right.
a lot of them couldn't comprehend
Right.
what was being said about them, what they did. And a lot of the brothers couldn't read.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate piece.
Yes, because
Yeah.
the education system
Right.
also failed them.
We know a report just came out that outlined that, you know, third and fourth grade. And you know what's deep is that, you know, they study in third and fourth grade test scores determine 10 to 15 years how many prison beds is going to be needed.
Exactly.
You know, so, you know,
Exactly.
the reading piece component, and you know, DOC is completely out of touch with reality of what's
Yes, they
going
are.
on, you know,
Yes, they are.
and
That's
pretty much they
the
don't
Department
care.
of Corrections.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not clear what they're correcting, but you know,
Exactly.
and it's been going on. You know, you got the second state highest budget, you know, throughout the state. You know, the first come with you know, with education, you know, and then department. So we got a challenge. We got a lot of work to do, you know, especially concerning, you know, our people, you know, and trying to educate them, because it's ironic that you happen to look at it as a discovery and find that loophole, and it's so you just can imagine how many other cases like
Exactly.
that, and that didn't get to you know, have your view or my
Exactly.
view of their cases,
Right.
and continue to deteriorate, you
Right.
know, in language inside.
Right.
You know, right here in New Jersey, you ain't got to go to El Salvador. You ain't got to look at no other spot.
That's
right
right
here
here.
in
That's
New Jersey, you know, you're talking about a young kid, you know, 18 years old, went in first time, and they gave me 6 parole hits. You know, it was malicious. You know, but we know that, you know, again, black bodies serve as an economic stimulus. So in order for them to keep them jobs, parole jobs, you're talking about $130,000, $150,000 job salary. You know, they had to
Exactly.
get individuals like myself hits. Because
Exactly.
what happened is they changed the law and they got a more stricter standard with 85%. So
Yes.
the individuals that serve 85% of their time, they don't really see the parole. There's no need for what they serve 85%, and then they come out. You know,
Right.
it's because they did majority of their time. So
Like
in
they
order for
max
parole,
out?
of course, in order for parole to sustain them $100,000, $150,000 job to get individuals that's under the old standard prior to the new standard with the 85%, individuals like myself, continuous hits. You know, I have a brother who I've been helping out since he came home in April of 2023,
Okay.
named Wilford Lee Holmes. You know,
Okay.
they get his brother 50 years. He served 50 years in New Jersey. He served 50 years. He was eligible for parole over 20, 30 years ago. You know, and I got with my guy Alexander Shalom from the ACLU. I said, listen, we gotta do something for this guy, man. It's unacceptable that he
Yes.
continue to, explore the de facto death penalty, because that's what it is. You know, Jersey, you know, they say they got rid of the death penalty, but they're exploring it through, a de facto way of continuous hits.
Right.
You know, this guy, 70-something years old. You know, we know he not mentally or physically capable of committing another crime.
Right.
You know, so the punitive aspect is like, you know, we know that 70-year-olds not running around here committing crimes. You know.
Right.
So what danger do he pose? So it's a malicious system. You know, it's a vicious system, and and that's what I explained in my book. You know, and we do time, they do business, and really have, our people, to set the different standard and have them understand the economic piece, because, nobody like to talk about the math and the economics.
Yes.
You know,
and I was just speaking to my videographer, Andrew,
Right.
Earlier before you came in, about how much, like, a guard working in the prison system, how much they make,
Right.
and then how much are we getting to educate our children.
Yeah, and that's
They get more, our children get less.
you're talking about a starting salary of $50,000, $60,000.
Yes.
And an unfortunate part that individuals come out, they can't get a $30,000, $40,000 job,
Right.
because they're using, an old drug offense that's prohibiting that individual from even getting a barber's license,
Right.
or cosmetology
Yes.
license.
Yes.
Although the crime itself had nothing to do, the element of the crime had nothing to do with the license. So
Yes.
it's so they block the individuals, but you're talking about an officer who retired and sent his kids to college, off of this individual,
That's right.
but and you look at, I ran across individual officers who have, from the grandfather to the grandson to their son, you understand? In this continuous cycle, you're talking about, areas of Bristol, South Wards, where it was rural land, it was, destitute, and they put
Right.
the prison there, which is South Wards State Prison, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
the entire neighborhood flourished. You got businesses
Yes.
everywhere, you got houses
Off of-
everywhere, because the number one entity that generate income is the prison.
Exactly.
And so everybody in the rural areas work at the prison, and it begin to flourish.
And
from
see,
there.
and that's one of the reasons why when I was working inside, I would always let the brothers and sisters know just how great they were.
That's a fact.
The greatness that's
important.
in them. And that was a
Right.
blessing for me.
Yes.
Because I discovered working, inside, we have some talented brothers and sisters in there. It's just that they made a mistake.
That's it.
And so
Right.
now you don't judge them.
Right.
You help them. Like I have a brother that I'm working with right now. While he was in prison, they was taking child support from his check. Yes.
Right.
And they did that for almost 20 years, right? And so when he comes and see me and everything, I'm saying, wait a minute, we got to do something about this.
Right.
Because you should, but the other thing was that the child was not his. Right?
Wow.
I said, this is crazy. So I told him what he needed to do.
Right.
He already got his first check.
Oh, right. Excellent.
And he's waiting to get his next check.
Right.
I said, and see, that's for me, when I hear certain stories or whatever, I want to find a way of how I can help you.
Right.
Because if they're doing this to them and they know that a lot of times people will take the charge because of as opposed to going to trial, because they're telling them if you go to trial, you're going to get more time.
Right.
I said, well, go to trial.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of cases, you may get free.
Right, and that's what happened with me. I had a judge. Her name was Peretti. She probably passed by now. She was an older lady. She said, "Young man, look out the window." I was in Essex County courthouse, and she said, "Do you see any trees out there?" I said, "No, I don't see any trees." She said, "If you don't take this deal," which was a 20 with a 10, "you don't take this deal, by the time you come home, it's gonna be a forest." So young guy, 18 years old.
Yes.
I was like, it was a scary statement.
Yes.
But I had a heart of a lion. I said, listen, I'm gonna go to trial. 'Cause a lot of stuff I didn't do. Newark couldn't solve a lot of stuff. They put it on me. Newark cops. Where they came out with a bombshell ACLU report about, and there was a federal probe by the Newark Police Department regarding the conditions and how they treat and falsifying evidence and all that, and falsifying charges against it. You got individuals still buried in Trenton State Prison because of them, for trumped up charges that was done by corrupt officers. So,
I know. Don't forget the women's prison.
And the female prison, yeah.
Yes.
In fact, I just got some intelligence that a sergeant, a lieutenant from Essex County Jail was escorted out yesterday for brutally assaulting a female prisoner in there. It get covered up. Essex County do a good job, at covering their stuff up, but it leaked out, and they escorted them right out, So I don't know. I'm trying to get the sister name, where we can, I believe she probably was involved with the previous Clinton matter when females was getting assaulted.
Oh, yes, that's right. That's right.
And,
yes.
I believe it was one of them. Yeah. So it's we when you talk about the conditions and the cover-ups that goes on and nepotism, that takes place.
A lot of that.
I tell people all the time, it's the difference between being a litigator, a civil rights activist, and a civil rights litigator. When you're able to be on the both ends of being an activist and a litigator.
Yes.
You sit in a different element. Because it's one thing to complain, and speak out about the violation. It's another thing to take action against it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And use the very tools, that they employ to fight against it. Because laws change things. And when you be able to have the mind of a litigator, and you surgical with what you do, you pretty much can be able to change things as well.
Definitely, and I know that when my youngest son was arrested in 2007, right? He was arrested for legally carrying his own weapons.
Right, that happens a lot. Yeah.
And so I get this call that they had him and everything, and so he was in Elizabeth. So I call him and they said, well, he was carrying guns. I said, yeah, I know. I signed for him.
Right.
Those are legal.
That's right.
So why would you have him in there, right? And so I had to go out to Elizabeth and everything. And so I say to the lieutenant, I said, those are his legal weapons. Why would you arrest him? And they said, well, one of them, because it was 3, he said one of them couldn't be authenticated. I said, well, wouldn't common sense tell you if 2 of them are authenticated, the other one is authenticated too?
Right.
Right. So he said, well, we've already set the charge, and if you don't get him out of here by 5 o'clock, we're going to put him in the Union County jail. And at that time, there was like a lot of things going on inside the jail,
Right.
And so I did, I got him out and everything. And then we go to court. It was my first time going through this process.
Right.
Then we go to court, and this is what the judge says, this is what he says.
Right.
He says, if you don't plead guilty for carrying these guns, I'm going to add an additional 5 years for each gun.
Right.
I stand up. I said, no, Your Honor, you must have didn't read the paperwork. I said, because you will see that they are his guns. And so he looks at the attorney.
Right.
And then and so he says to the attorney,
Right.
if you don't plead guilty, I'm going to charge him 5 years for each gun. And we all got up and said, not guilty.
Bottom line.
Not guilty.
Let's go to trial.
That's right.
Right.
And you know what I did the next day? I wrote the Attorney General.
Right, as you should.
And the next day, the next court appearance, that judge was not there.
Oh, absolutely.
And then the case was dismissed
Right.
after going through it for like from June to like February the following year. Because and every time, this is what they did, and this is why I'm glad I learned this, was that every time we would go to the courts, they would say, do you want to plead? I said, no, he's not pleading. This is his first offense.
Yeah, force him into a plea bargain.
That's why I said,
Right.
plus he's innocent.
Yeah, that's
So,
what they do here in
it was
Essex
case.
County. They put 20 individuals in a cell together, and they put them in these harsh conditions and feed them this deplorable food, and you know, it's designed to break them, and they force them into a plea.
Exactly.
You know, so you got a lot of individuals like the individual you ran across in Delaney Hall who forced to take a plea when otherwise they won't, because they're trying to get out of the conditions they in.
And not
It's
knowing
different
that
types of conditions. Not
they're
knowing
going home with a felony.
Yeah, they pleading guilty for a charge they didn't commit.
Yes.
And that happens all the time. Remind me of a case that I was helping litigate when I came home. You know, the guys gave me a shot. Gerald Saluti, you know, gave me a shot. I was working with him, and we was representing a kid, young kid, you know, first charge, 18 years old, you know, up in New Brunswick, you know, and came through here in Newark. And it's like, you know, the severeness of the charge, like, you know, they said he made, you know, a broken tail light, you know, his light wasn't working, and, you know, and come to find out his light was working. You know, he went to put the cop on the stand. The cop clearly said, yeah, he broken tail light, and we searched his car, and next thing, you know, and we found all kinds of stuff in his car, you know, and come to find out, we had it just so happened he had the repair slip from the mechanic shop to show that, you know, he just got his car repaired, you know, so I was able to go out as an investigator, go talk to the repair guy, said, listen, we need, this young kid needs you, you know, in court. We want to send a subpoena, don't be alarmed, you know. So you come to court and testify about, you know, the guy just came, and I did a 3-point inspection, which means that I checked his entire car and nothing was wrong with his tail light, you know?
Right.
And so, you know, and they was adamant about sending that young kid to prison, sending him to jail, you know, and you don't take this plea bargain. And, you know, in fact, the prosecutor, this was in Middlesex County, not Newark, pardon me. And the cop said, if you don't take this, the prosecutor said, if you don't take this plea, which is 3 years, then I'm gonna give you the max.
Yes.
You know, for each count. You know,
and they get scared when they do that.
And the young kid, you know, he was scared to death.
Yes.
You know, like I was when I was 18.
Yes.
You know, but
they take advantage of that.
He had a good attorney, and he said, listen, and he trusted in us. He said, I'm willing to go. So he said, you file this motion for severance. That means, you know, all the stuff that they found in the car, whatever, they have to toss away. But if you file making me work, and I gotta respond to this motion or brief, then I'm gonna give you the max on trial, this and that. But anyway, it got severed. It got thrown out, and he ended up, all the charges being dismissed, you know, because it's systemic throughout this country how they prey on, you know, young black kids.
They do. That's right. They do.
On realizing and understanding.
Especially when it's their first time and they don't know anything about the system. You know, they're scared and everything. Yes.
Yeah.
Because you know what you remind me of?
Yeah.
When I started working at Kentuck, there was a young man. He was like 23 years old, and it was his first offense. It had something to do with stealing a car or something, right? So they wanted to send him to prison, and I said, well, he's not a candidate for prison. He doesn't need to go to prison. Right. And so I told the young man, I said, I'm going to write a letter to the judge for you, okay? Right. Because after he came in, he told me, I said, no, this is good. I'm going to write a letter to the judge. I wrote a letter to the judge, and in the letter, this is one of the things I said to the judge, because he was like in his 60s. I said to him, do you remember when you were in your 20s? What you did? Right. That was some of the things I said to him,
Reflect back, right.
Right, you know, this young man, 23 years old, he didn't need to go to prison.
Right.
Right? So anyway, he was released. And when the director read the letter that I sent to the judge, he said, Ms. Bay, you wrote this to the judge?
Right.
I said, yeah, and he released him.
Right.
I said, everybody do crazy things.
Right.
Sometimes in their life.
We all make mistakes. You gotta.
Yeah, we all make mistakes.
We sit in the country where the president was convicted of 34 counts,
Yeah.
felony counts, and the president of the United States. You got a guy convicted of a car, stealing a car, and can't even get a decent job.
Right.
So, the wealth gap in this country, is major, and we got. I commend, the mayor when he was sponsoring, the pilot program of, dealing with the low income individuals that qualify under the Marshall Plan,
Right.
the Urban Marshall Plan. That's what he
Right.
was pushing, But it's, speaking of helping, our people, that's what inspired me, coming home, street doctor.
Yes,
rest in
because
peace.
Street introduced me to you.
That's right. Street
That's
doctor,
right.
going inside the Laney Hall.
Go inside the
matter of
Laney
fact.
Hall, and they hired him, and the next
That's
thing I
right.
know, here you come.
Talking to the brothers, he used to bring me in.
Exactly.
They hired Street, and
Exactly.
Street doctor played a major part of you the street
That's right.
council.
Yes.
He said, Street doc, say you the street council,
Right.
And I missed the brother dearly, but it allowed me to try to continue to work and continue. I'm talking about on dark days and dark nights, dark alleyways. Street was, come on, Street. I need you to walking in.
That's right.
Giving it to the. I haven't seen nobody match Street.
Not me either.
Nowhere, not even close.
Nope.
But
He was so sincere too about what he was doing.
He was very sincere, and I was with Street, in this during his last dying breath, and as he took his last breath, and Street died homeless.
Yes.
He's died homeless. People, they throwing him crumbs, throwing him peanuts. But Street, you give Street $5, he going to Penn Station to get that money out.
I know.
I saw it and I witnessed it myself. But it's the stigma, that we have and the psychology that we stuck with, thinking that our people. But Street was sincere. He was sincere about helping our people. So are you. So as well as myself. I opened up a nonprofit called Street to Street Mentorship.
That's right, because we're gonna have to wrap it up and everything. But
Right.
I want you to talk about your nonprofit that you have.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
what you're doing and everything, and how people can get your book.
Right. So yeah, it's the nonprofit was inspired by the great street doctor called Street to Street Mentorship. Right there, 972 Broad Street.
Yes.
And really focus on getting towards the youth and helping
Yes.
brothers and sisters when they come home and try to steer them. I'm the best evidence that the process it does work. You just
Yes,
got to
it
stick
does.
with it. You got to educate yourself while they're inside.
And you gotta have
That's
the right
key
people
piece.
working with you.
Right. So anybody want to purchase the book, they can go on it's all on all the platforms.
Okay.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or they can write a letter downtown and I can mail them a book, as well. Or they can go to the website called Street ST, the number 2 ST Street to Street mentorship.us. That's the website.
Okay, well, I'll make sure that, when this is aired, that information is on there
Absolutely.
as well.
Appreciate you.
And I appreciate you, and I'm so grateful that we're still doing this, because
Absolutely.
the brothers and sisters, and I call all brothers and sisters, black, white, Latino.
That's right.
It doesn't matter to me.
That's right.
Brothers and sisters who need our help, we are here
That's
to
correct.
help them.
That's correct. It's the Harriet Tubman of our time. The one and only Miss Maryam Bay. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I am so grateful. Thank you for coming out. And I want to thank you all for listening to us. And when you see this, could you please like and subscribe? And if you have any questions, you will be provided the information to get in contact with me. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you are in the world today. Thank you so much.